Alex Dunn here, and today I am coming at you with more misconceptions about drafts and drafting. Several of these were suggested by viewers like you. There were some I could not believe I forgot in the first video, which I will link to down below if you missed it. I have 8 misconceptions to go over about drafting and drafts, and let's just dive right in. The first misconception is that fast writing equals bad writing. I want to thank Rachel Bateman for this one. I am not a fast drafter, so this isn't a misconception I have butted up against, but I know fast drafters and it is totally true. People operate on this assumption that if you write really, really fast, it must be garbage, but some people can fast draft in 10 days, 30 days, 6 weeks, what have you, and it doesn't mean that the book is bad. The thing is that every single book has to be edited, so it's just a matter of getting those words down on the page. First drafts aren't supposed to be perfect, so I don't know why we would hold a fast draft up to this bar of, well, if you write really, really fast, it can't be a perfect book. Well, it can't be a perfect book anyway, because the second misconception is the opposite of this, which is slow drafts are good. I think that this misconception, the two of them come from most writers aren't fast writers, most people are slower writers, and people assume that slower writing, more deliberate writing, well, it's more deliberate. There's more care put into it, so it must be better. The thing is, you could take forever to draft something. You can take years to draft a book, and it doesn't make it good. It certainly doesn't make it better than a fast draft, because a draft is a draft, and a draft done very quickly can have the exact same problems as a draft done very, very slowly, especially when it's not just about mechanics of language, when it's about pacing or character development or what have you. You can have those problems no matter how quickly or slowly you draft. Both writers are going to be editing their books. The third misconception is also about just different writers having different processes, and that is you must draft in order. Linearly. You write the first scene, the second scene, third, all the way to the end, and that is the only way to write a book. Not true. Now, I am a linear drafter, so I am part of team linear drafting. However, I know many writers whose creative process is simply to jump around, and you're like, what? Unless you're one of them. Many writers start at the end. They literally write the end of the book first, and then they go back and they write. Or there are writers who jump around. They might write the end and then go, oh, I really want to write that twist in the middle, and then they write that. And they are able to jump around and come up with a draft that way. Whatever process works for you is the process that works for you. So it's definitely a misconception that the only way to write a book is from start to finish. The fourth misconception, this is one that really grinds my gears. If you're a regular here, you know this one, and that is the misconception that you must outline your story in order to draft a book. No, you are not required to outline the entire book, part of the book, to outline at all. Hello and welcome to the wonderful world of what we call pantsing, which is writing a book by the seat of your pants. Now, pantsing really varies, but believe it or not, there are those of us out there who don't have to outline a book before we draft it. We can jump in with as little as just a high concept and like a single first scene and go. Or if you fall more in the middle, as I do, it's not so much an outline you have, but like a roadmap. I tend to know the inciting incident, like setup and characters, a big thing that happens in the middle, and then kind of where I want things to land in the end, usually in terms of character development, but sometimes I have a climax or twist in mind, and that is all I need. I don't need to outline the entire book in order to write a draft. And in fact, with this misconception, I offer to writers the idea, if you've been struggling to draft because you can't get past the outlining stage, you might not be an outliner. I strongly encourage you to throw caution to the wind and just try drafting your book. You might be surprised. The fifth misconception, this is a funny one that's all about semantics, and that is the idea that a first draft is obviously always first. Like, all you have is a first draft. It's called first draft. There is a concept called zero draft. Not all authors use this, but some do, so I'm just bringing up the misconception that it's all about the first draft. For some writers, there is a thing called a zero draft. Some call this a dirty draft, and it is going to vary writer to writer. I do find faster writers, who we talked about in the first point, tend to do the zero draft strategy, the dirty draft strategy, and that is, it is a quickly written, fast drafted, very dirty draft of a book. For many writers, this is an underwritten draft of a book, which is why they call it draft zero. Let's say eventually the book's going to be 80,000 words. The dirty draft might be 50,000 words. It has all of those essential moments and scenes, but there are going to be parts where the writer just skipped ahead or left a note. This is a perfectly valid way to draft a book. Then what the writer does is they take that zero draft and they do a pretty intensive next edit to bring it up to a proper full first draft. It's going to differ for every writer, but many writers like the zero drafting process because of the pressure it takes off of them to write a better, longer, and complete first draft. So open up your mind to the zero draft, dirty draft. But ultimately it is semantics, and it's up to a writer to call their draft whatever they want to call their draft. The seventh misconception is a very, very tricky one, and that is that you can edit as you go. Can you? This is one that is true for some writers, but for many writers, the answer is no. The misconception is, no, you can't do this, because if you do, you're never going to finish a draft. I find with a lot of newer writers, it's primarily novice or amateur writers, that the process of editing as they go, so you write a scene or a chapter and then you immediately go back to start working on editing it before moving on to the next scene, this creates an endless cycle of obsessing over all of your prose and your setup and trying to write that elusive perfect draft. There are no perfect drafts. And that it actually makes it more likely that the writer is going to give up on the book. Many writers who edit as they go, amateur writers who edit as they go, I am speaking from experience, by the way, give up. It's almost always an act 2, which is the hardest part of a book to write, in my humble opinion. And it's where you're most likely to literally lose the plot on your book. And if you're editing as you go, it enables you to obsess over everything, and it basically creates blocks for you, and you're more likely to give up. So yeah, it's a misconception that it's totally fine to edit as you go. If you see that advice, honestly, run, unless you are a more experienced writer. Once you have successfully completed a draft and you know that you are able to push through the roadblocks of editing as you go, you can basically earn the right to be an edit as you go writer. But I am always very, very wary when I see that advice to writers, particularly novice writers, people who have never completed a novel, because it's just not true. And the eighth misconception is also kind of a divide between newer writer and more experienced writer. And by more experienced, I mean more ingrained in a writer community. And that is the misconception that you can totally just have an alpha reader read your draft while you write it. I find that this is something that holds back a ton of newer writers, people working on their first novels, because if you wait for a third party, especially if it's a friend or a family member, to read as you are writing quick as lightning so that you can move on to the next bit, you're gonna die waiting in a lot of cases. It's really dangerous to bake into your creative process and your motivation to write someone else's opinion and validation. It's really the validation that kills it, because inevitably life comes up. You can't guarantee that you will have a reader who is on the exact same availability and reading schedule as your writing schedule. The last thing you want to do is lose momentum because you're waiting for feedback from someone else. This is another place where I just see a lot of newer writers stall. And again, I am speaking from personal experience. On my first ever attempt at a novel, I tried to write it fandom style, which was I had a beta reader and I was sending her chapters as I was writing it. And she got busy and fell behind and couldn't give me feedback, and I stalled and I lost enthusiasm for the project and I gave up on it at about 20,000 words. My first novel I actually completed. I basically taught myself to not need that validation anymore. I taught myself to be able to push through a complete draft at my own pace without needing to hear from someone else. And it has served me very, very well. It was essential in essentially leveling up as a writer and being able to push through and complete drafts. And it still serves me today as a published author. But I will say, as you get more entrenched in your writing community and you meet more people and you have more CPs and betas, you can sometimes find alpha readers as you draft a book. But the thing is to not be dependent on it for your writing process. It should be a bonus if you do end up having a friend who can read as you write. But do not depend on it as a matter of course. And last but certainly not least, the 8th misconception about drafting is that drafting is the same every single time for a book. Once you learn a drafting process, you're good to go. And unfortunately, this just isn't true. I mean, for better or for worse. No drafting process is exactly the same for every single book because you're going to evolve as a writer, develop new strategies. Sometimes things that used to work on a previous book stop working on the next one. And you're going to have to push yourself past your comfort zone, out of your comfort zone, and try different methods for drafting so that it's whatever works for the story. And some stories demand different drafting processes, so you always have to be kind of flexible and evolving. To give you a personal example, the drafting method that worked for me on 3 whole ass books was writing at home by myself at night with a glass of wine, and I didn't have any problems with motivation and getting good word counts. And then my 4th book, the first book that I wrote on contract, it just didn't work as efficiently anymore. I wasn't getting the word counts that I needed in the time that I needed to hit my deadlines. And so I pushed myself to leave my house and get motivation from writing at coffee shops. And now that is my secret weapon for when I need a lot of words in a very short period of time. And it's essentially about kicking me in the butt to work. That's just a personal example. All sorts of things can be different in your drafting process that will work one time. Like maybe on one draft, you're able to put placeholders, but the next time you do a draft, it just doesn't work for the book. The book falls apart. You could do a fast draft, dirty draft on one project and it just does not work for the next project that you do. Some books require more outlining than others. I have a whole video about my thriller writing process where I have had to step up my outlining skills. I'll never go all the way, but I have definitely had to do a bit more pre-planning for those specific genre of books, for those specific drafts. It's going to be different for every single book that you write. So that's the thing. Writing books and drafting is this beautiful organic thing, so you just have to be open to the process. Just be careful not to go into drafting a book or judging other people's drafting processes with too many preconceived notions or judgments. That's the whole point of this series of videos on misconceptions on drafting. So that was 8 more of them for you. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and if I can come up with even more misconceptions, I'll make another video. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that. I can tell when you guys watch these videos and you're not subscribed. And if you're subscribed, YouTube will notify you when I post new videos, which is 2 to 3 times a week, though I think you have to turn on the notification bell. And as always, guys, thank you so much for watching and happy writing.